So again, Jessica Sims, the Virginia Field Coordinator with Appalachian Voices. I am in Central Virginia in the Richmond area. I want to say thank you again to y'all for joining, and then to my co-host for this evening, Deirdre, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Deirdre. I'm an attorney with the Southern Environmental Law Center. I'm based in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I work primarily on energy.
Thanks, Deirdre. So let's go ahead and get started with tonight's program. I'm going to share my screen. But just a reminder, it is being recorded. If you do need closed captioning, you can go to the More option on your Zoom and hit the three dots. And there is a part there where you can just click on captions, and that will pull that up. And all right, a thumbs up, Deirdre. Is that up on the screen all right there?
I can see it, yeah.
Okay, great. So tonight's program is going to cover just a little bit of housekeeping about the call, and let me go ahead and have that chat open. Thanks for putting messages in there. Information about the project to make sure we're all on the same page with what we understand and know about it. A little bit about FERC and some of its processes. Deirdre is going to talk about why it's important to be an intervener, what that means. We're also going to navigate the FERC website together and kind of go through a step-by-step process to make sure we know how to submit our intervention comment or document or document list document. And then we'll also, of course, have time for question and answers. But if you have any questions that come to mind immediately, go ahead and put them in the chat and we can address them in real time. So I think folks on this call are familiar with the project, but we are discussing the intervention process specifically in the Southeast Supply Enhancement Project, which is a large 42-inch diameter, about 54-mile pipeline expansion from the Williams companies, who has an existing network of pipelines in the Transco network. The intervention process could be used for any FERC project that's within the docket. But this specific one has had a intervention period open recently, now that they have submitted their full application. And this intervention period is open until December 3rd at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So what is the SSEP, as some of us have been calling it? Essentially, the project is split into two loops. What they are calling loops, it's really just a line of pipeline in Virginia and in North Carolina. In addition to that, the project does impact many other states, South Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama. And that looks like compressor station additions in some of those states. And specifically in North Carolina, we know that they are adding gas infrastructure and gas units to some of the compressor stations along the route there. So welcoming some new folks to tonight's program. We're just making sure we're on the same page with the SSEP. So you can see there, this is, Transco has existing lines that run from New York to the Gulf Coast, and they are trying to really have a massive increase to their capacity that would run through their lines. Although the length of pipeline is only about 54 miles, the capacity that Williams Company has said this pipeline would have is actually more similar to the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. So we are talking about a massive amount of gas infrastructure, methane gas infrastructure that would be added to the system. So we've got folks tonight with us in Virginia and in North Carolina. So those are the two areas we're looking at most closely this evening. But where is this gas going? Predominantly, the gas would go into Duke Energy's sort of network of build out, and that would connect it to other pipelines, intra-state pipelines that are only contained within the state and would be feeding new gas plants. And so you can see on the very busy image there, we are already burdened with a significant amount of fossil fuel infrastructure here in the Southeast. I can speak, to Virginia's, especially its pipelines, its methane beds, its coal. So a real myriad of harmful fossil fuel industry occurrences and ongoing projects and new things being proposed all of the time, unfortunately. And so our position is that there are more affordable options and there are much healthier options available, like utility scale solar paired with battery, and that greater emphasis on the cheapest energy you'll ever spend is the energy you don't use, energy efficiency. But really, the Southeast Supply Enhancement Project is one that is indicative of the overbuilding in this region. So this is a project that has been in the works, publicly for over a year, and they were approaching communities. They had a period of scoping and review where they were soliciting feedback from the public ahead of submitting an application. And some of the things that come to mind about concerns for this project are the impacts to our water and air, including specific waterways in Virginia, the Bannister River, in North Carolina, the Dan River, concerns about the air quality related to adding additional gas compression, massive amount of horsepower and what that means for the communities around that area that are breathing in that additional set of emissions. The things we associate and occur with all pipelines, methane leakage, that can impact water, it can impact soil, and we know that, excuse me, methane is a potent greenhouse gas. And so projects of this capacity are really just adding to the overall climate crisis and accelerating that the negative effects of that. That means more extreme weather, that means more recurrent flooding, and just making everything harder to sort of pause and get to a point where we're not making it worse and we're actually just kind of stopping for a moment, stopping adding this type of infrastructure. So we do have particular concerns about Williams companies and Transco specifically pipelines, that network of lines, their safety record. This is something that's been highlighted by many groups within the FERC docket, which FERC standing for Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that their record is one of the worst in terms of number of incidents based on, decades of use of their lines. This is highlighted in some of the scoping comments, which were submitted by a Pipeline Safety Trust. And so we have our eye on that too. In Virginia, we've seen a pipeline explosion fairly recently near Interstate 81, and that's something we're certainly concerned about and looking at. When you're thinking about that other safety concern, it's also thinking about what is the evacuation zone and how many thousands of feet on both sides could people be impacted if there is a problem. Looking to where the pipeline is routed, what capacity do emergency responders in the area have to deal with a problem of this magnitude of a pipe of that high capacity and high pressure. That's another very local but important safety concern. We do know, because Williams companies themselves said it, that they recognize that the benefits are not going to the local communities. And one of their earlier filings in the scoping documents, which had its own kind of docket in the online library, they said the benefits of the project are not realized by those who are impacted. Instead, the impacts are borne by those whose properties are impacted, the impacts are borne by those whose properties are impacted and benefits are seen by those outside the project area. Therefore, the risk is that impacted areas are not swayed by economic benefits, including jobs, additional gas, and limited tax revenues. So we know that they want to present this to decision makers as a project that is really helpful to the local economy, the local job force, tax revenues, but the reality of that does not match. It is always an oversized promise for what the projects can bring, and it would actually create few, if any, permanent jobs. So we also posit that Virginia and the Carolinas have enough existing infrastructure to meet gas demand. And so we are really cautious and against the addition of new infrastructure that's going to take years to come online and just push us further towards the climate crisis. We also know that there are the issues associated with those along the route who are dealing with land agents or the company themselves. And that sort of message that we've seen with every pipeline ever, it's a done deal. There's not a reason to fight it. And so that can look a lot of different ways: the use of eminent domain, or offering minimal compensation for land that is impacted, or expanding easements, or sort of the contract with the company about how much of your property they can use. So lots of concerns about this project. Folks have been looking at this, thankful for the coalition that has come together to fight this project in Virginia and in North Carolina. You'll see it on a lot of slides, but we're doing a lot of what is public facing at nossep.org. And so the resources from tonight's program will also be posted there, the recording and some things to help you with the FERC process. So I'm just going to go a little bit over the timeline and then what the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is, especially for those. I know we've got some pros on the Zoom tonight, but if you are totally unfamiliar with what that entity is. So we're looking right now at the proposed timeline that Williams companies have put out for Southeast Supply Enhancement Project. They had their initial outreach and scoping. They had a pre-filing in 2024, and that opened a pre-filing docket where folks could weigh in with comments. They have officially filed their FERC application this fall, and now that begins what we're looking at now, an intervenor period. They've proposed that they would be looking at a spring or and then into 2027 in-service date. But we often see that projects can not meet the timelines that they're putting out there into the public. And so we're already seen where Williams Companies has delayed a couple of things and has had to adjust their timeline a little bit too. So we're kind of in the thick of it right now. This FERC process is incredibly important. Participating in that process in any way that feels comfortable and appropriate to you is really important. That can mean a lot of things. It can mean just keeping an eye on it. It can mean submitting comments. It can also mean being an intervenor, and that's what we'll talk about this evening. So even with this FERC process, there are many permits in addition to the FERC federal review that are needed. And so FERC itself, this big federal entity, has to give the project a certificate of public convenience and necessity. They have to say, yes, this project is needed for the greater good. And so that by itself is troublesome because they have such a record of rubber stamping and saying, well, that one's needed and that one's needed and that one's needed. But that is just one component of the permits that they would need. Under federal permits, they'll also need an Army Corps 404 permit. That's part of the Clean Water Act. At the state level, they will need water permits from both North Carolina and Virginia. And in North Carolina, because they're adding additional gas to some of their compressor stations, they will need a permit for those units too. So, pausing here, we just want to, before we get diving even more so into FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, I want to invite any questions into the chat. We will have space at the end of the program for Q&A. That portion of the program will not be recorded, but Feel free, if something does come to mind, we can try and address it in real time. But what is FERC? This is an entity that is sort of the first stop for the applicant to get permission to have this regulatory body say, yes, we think that's needed, but it's a very important moment for the public to be able to weigh in. So within each stage of this process, there's multiple times that you can participate in public comment periods, intervention periods, and you can always submit comments. FERC is an independent agency. It's kind of its own thing, created by Congress in 1977. So they're reviewing all sorts of projects that are related to interstate transportation of petroleum, of pipelines, LNG terminals, hydropower projects sometimes, and transmission line projects. So as it relates to energy and it's crossing state lines and is a interstate project, they're weighing in. The agency is headed by 5 commissioners. They are all nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. It's sort of on a rolling basis. So you have commissioners from different administrations in the space at the same time, but they can make a decision with only 3 commissioners. We've seen them approve projects with significantly harmful impacts with just a roster of 3. So a 2-to-1 vote can decide something. FERC does have a monthly meeting that is open to the public. That is in Washington, D.C., but you can also watch a live stream. And that's where some of these decisions have been getting discussed. And so it is an important place to kind of check in and to familiarize yourself with their website to see what are all the things that we can sort of uncover in trying to understand FERC processes and how the public can participate. Some of that is very opaque, it's unnecessarily difficult, but they do now have an Office of Public Participation that wants to help make that process a little more manageable. So FERC has the panel of folks determining if yes, this is yes or no, it's in the public necessity. And then they issue the CPCN, the Certificate of Public Necessity, Public Convenience and Necessity. So that's a lot of information. We're all on the same page now with the Southeast Supply Enhancement Project, what that is, what the negative impacts could be. We've talked a little bit about FERC, what that entity is. Let's look again at what the review process looks like. And we're essentially on step 3 of the image that you're seeing now. So they started by putting together a request. Williams Company said, we want to build this pipeline. They open what's called a pre-filing docket, and the company itself holds some open houses to get community feedback or to give communities feedback. That's the pre-filing stage, and it had a docket number that you could check. Docket meaning just an online library, and you could submit comments there. That opened scoping periods, which is when they take a deep dive look at what the public thinks FERC should be looking at. And that was a time when a lot of us and folks on this Zoom were able to comment on very specific environmental issues, very specific ways in which the project impacts them, and their livelihood, their homes, the roads nearby, their farms. That had public comment period, and it also had some hearings. We are now in step 3, which is the application stage. Because they've officially applied, they've got all their paperwork together, they've given it to FERC, they've said, here's our application. This opens a new docket or online library, and you see that number there. So the docket we're talking about tonight is CP 25-10-000. But what happens now is that they have the application and FERC staff reviews the application. They receive requests to be interveners. And then they decide, what kind of environmental review are we going to do? Are we going to do the most robust version possible, which is an environmental impact statement? Or are we going to do an environmental assessment, which is a less robust review? So in our mind, it's important to ask for the environmental impact statement, or EIS, because that's going to be more detailed. This will spur, when that decision is made and that document comes out, that brings you to the next step. At the bottom there, the environmental review. They are either announcing this environmental impact statement or environmental assessment, and there'll be related public comment periods and more in-person meetings for the communities along the route. We don't have there's not a set thing of they'll hold X number of meetings. It's not a guarantee that they'll hold it in every county that's impacted. So these are the types of things we can ask for by participating in the public comment process and submitting comments into the docket. So tonight's program will show you how to operate within the FERC website, and that can be really helpful if you want to submit a brief comment, you want to submit a letter. But tonight's primary focus is intervention, which is a sort of different and important step that people impacted by this project in some way can take. And so I'm going to put it to my co-host Deirdre to talk more about what intervention is, why it's important, what it means.
Okay. Hi everyone. Apologies again for the fact that I am off camera because I'm sitting in the dark apartment. Not really sure what's going on with the power over here, but intervention broadly is something I've been characterizing as a way for you to keep your options open. So when we're looking at interstate gas pipelines, the main law that's going to be determining, who can challenge and when, there are two of them. There's the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, which everybody's familiar with, I think. The other one is the Natural Gas Act. And the Natural Gas Act has a special requirement in it that if you want to eventually challenge FERC's final decision in court, you first have to be an intervener in the docket. And that is really just an overly formal word for filling out a form on FERC's website that says that you want to formally participate in the docket, and that's it. It doesn't bind you to litigating or challenging anybody later. It's just a step you take to keep that option open if you think you might want to explore it. I will also add, and I do think this is important, you do not need to become an intervener to just to file comments. So if you are not thinking about potentially challenging FERC's eventual bad decision, you can go ahead and submit comments on what we hope is going to be the draft environmental impact statement that the agency is going to come out with over the coming months, without having to intervene. So intervention is just the box you have to check if you want to eventually be able to challenge the agency's decision.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. So what we're describing tonight is a little bit of a separate process, and the resources from this evening will be shared in the morning. We have a guide that you can follow. So don't feel like you have to remember all of this. We'll certainly make that available to you and can help you in that process too, if you would like more one-on-one help or to kind of walk through it again with you. So Deirdre has, very well explained what the reasoning is for becoming an intervener. So before we actually look at what that process looks like, we're going to, and to say too, we are doing the short version of that this evening. There's a short version and a long version. We'll talk a little bit about it, but what we'll look at is the shorter version of that. Becoming an intervener, you are highlighting who you are, what your status is, as sort of explaining your status as someone impacted by the project. Within your motion to intervene, you will talk about your interest or your stake in this issue impacts to you or your organization. You will address why you want to participate. And really, FERC spells that out for us, that you want to say you're doing this intervention so you can fully participate. And then within the document itself, you have a couple things you have to put in there for codes and references. But you also have to put some level of contact information. So, Deirdre, is there anything else you might want to add before I switch to us looking sort of at the FERC website together?
No, I think that's basically it.
Okay, great. Okay, so we'll get to the gritty details of the FERC website. So, some of us may spend a lot of time on this site, but I'm hoping we can come away from
Yep.
this program, yeah, to Deirdre especially, with just an understanding of how to navigate it, because there's a lot going on in it. So what you're looking at here is ferc.gov, ferc.gov. There's a lot of information on it. You've got information about just industries, overall, public participation, very helpful link there on the left. This is where you can find some of the guides to help through these processes, and also to connect with the Office of Public Participation. They've also got news and events. And in the example we have here, we can see in the bottom right, they list their commission meeting, which is their monthly meeting. So I'll be tuning into that online tomorrow, just to see what they have to say about some other projects. But if you are going to participate as an intervener, this is the same if you want to submit a comment too. Your very first step is just going to FERC Online and clicking on that link. When you get to that page, it'll pull up a pop-up that'll say you are leaving this website. That's a little confusing because you thought you're going to be on the FERC website. It does take you to a secondary site, but it is still managed by FERC. This is a step where, to participate in this process, you do need to have a email login and password. This allows you to subscribe to things, to submit comments that have attachments, and to do certain processes that are a little more detailed. You can see tonight we would be using select e-filing. That's when you are actually uploading documents or doing certain processes. But there's also an option that's a little blocked by the arrow there to e-comment. That's a quick way to submit a comment. But let's take a look at this page. There's also a lot going on this. We've got, our e-filing, which is what we're going to use tonight. We've got information there that you can say query mailing list, query service list. We're going to come back to that because that is important for interveners. So basically, if I was doing this, I'm logging in with my email and my password, and I'm getting to my next page. So this is a step that could take you a moment if you do need to set up a new profile. So pretend there's not a blank white spot there. I don't know what that's from, so sorry. But basically, you're clicking on e-filing. It's taking you to this page. And then you have to pick from these 3 columns what you want to pick. So the first thing is general. That's going to be really what you pick every time. When you select general, it pops up all the things in the middle. And then you're going to select intervention. When you select that, it'll populate the 3rd column of the types of intervene. So tonight we are talking about doc-less motion to intervene. That's the short way to do this. I highly recommend it. We also have information about motion to intervene. That's the long way, and that involves a much longer document. But we will have an example of that we'll share with you as a follow-up. You also notice there that it says motion intervene or out of time motion to intervene. That just means if you were doing this process after the intervention period has ended. And a reminder, the intervention period for the Southeast Supply Enhancement Project ends December 3rd at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Can I
Okay,
just jump in with one quick detail about that? I'm really sorry.
yeah.
I of course can't find the hand function. We've noticed that this particular commission, like with the newer commissioners on it, has been a lot less lenient with out of time requests to intervene. So we highly recommend that if you want to intervene, please do it by December 3rd. You can make a motion to intervene after that deadline, but it's up to the commissioner's discretion at that point whether they let you. And we've been seeing them say no lately a lot more than they have in the past.
Thank you for flagging that important component of this. So they have not given folks much time for this. We would hope that they might extend it, but certainly by December 3rd at 5 p.m. Sometimes it has a lag too. So if you are submitting something, I would make sure you're getting it in at 4:50 or a couple minutes before. And that's the other part of this. You may apply to be an intervener. You can assume you'll probably be accepted as one, but there's not a guarantee that you would be granted that status. But the next step is really just figuring out what docket you're trying to do this in. And that's when you're going to use the search function to look up CP 25-10-000 and hit search. That's going to pull up the docket for the Southeast Supply Enhancement Project. It kind of looks like you've selected it, but you haven't. You have to hit the blue plus mark, and that will show it sort of at the bottom of the screen where currently it says no dockets have been selected. So when you hit that blue plus, it will also appear there, and then you would go to the next page. So you've decided you're going to do a document-less intervention description. I am pulling this image that you see right now directly, thank you so much, FERC OPP, from their website because they have spelled out very clearly what they need to appear in the intervention comment. So you want to, as best you can, follow this example. Within the docket, there are multiple examples of documentless intervention. It's also a good idea to take a look at how other people are approaching this. It is meant to be personalized, but there's a couple things anyone who intervenes needs to try and have within there. So your status, you might be representing yourself as a landowner, or you might be intervening on behalf of an organization, including a community organization that is opposed to the project. You, within this 6,000 character limit, are going to describe how the project has interest to you, to your organization, and that it may have an effect on you. So folks that feel this might have a positive effect or a negative effect, they can still become interveners. So just to make clear, intervention doesn't mean you're for a project or against a project. It means that you want to participate in that way with the review. So the other thing you want to make sure to have is that you describe how, if you want to participate fully in the proceedings, you need to be an intervener. So the way they phrase that, which is a little confusing, is just reiterating why it's important for you to be an intervener. You also want to include this phrase referencing the commission's regulations pursuant to section 214 CFR 385.214 to motion to intervene. So with that, you could really just type that verbatim, include that in one of your sentences. And then you're closing out your brief motion to intervene by writing your full name and some contact information. Always remember, if you are putting something in the docket, it is in the public record. So don't put any contact information, personal information that you don't want the public to be able to see. So that's sort of what they are asking you to do. With the follow-up materials, we'll make sure to send you an example of what that can look like in real life, because that seems a little technical right there, but you're certainly making it personal and explaining why you want to be an intervener. So the next thing is essentially saying, when you become an intervener, you are added to the service list for a project. You're on the list of all the people that have intervened. So that can be a range. It's companies with a stake in it, it's landowners, it's environmental groups, it's community groups. And they build this list because when you're an intervener, you are required to communicate to those other interveners. And so with that next step, after you've written out your document, you're going to the next step, you're just making sure to explain sort of, are you filing on behalf of yourself or an organization? And then who should be on that service list? Is it you as an individual? And that's where you see that second square there, where you might be putting your contact email and just explaining, yes, you should be on the list. You're the person that should be contacted. So this is a multi-step process, but you're really only submitting one sort of form. It is a great idea to draft out what you want to say ahead of time in case there's a problem with the website or your power goes out and you're dealing with, anything can happen there. So it's good to sort of write it out so that you can cut and paste it into the document. So what happens next? Couple of things. They're going to determine whether or not they accept you as an intervener. If they do, there is a next step where you can download the service list, and you do have a responsibility to send anything you file to that list of entities and people, because interveners, they're getting sort of the first scoop on anything that's going into the docket. We are happy to help you with that process too. We'll make sure that that sort of how-to part of it is available. But what can you do while you're waiting for that? Just in general, want to stay connected to this project and informed. Subscribing to the docket is a really helpful way to do this. So I'll go back for just a second to this slide. FERC Online. Subscribing to a docket does mean that you need a login and a password. But you can see there below the pink circle, e-subscription. That's where I've gone many times to log in and subscribe myself to dockets that I want to stay in touch with. That includes the pre-filing for SSEP, and it also includes their new docket. So basically, I'm getting emails anytime someone submits something, so I can be as up to date as possible. That's one step you can take whether or not you intervene before December 3rd. Another great thing, you can submit a comment into the docket at any time, even outside of comment periods, intervention periods, and I highly encourage you to do so. We've seen some really great comments come into the docket just today, where people are asking for a full environmental impact statement, not just an EA. They want a full review. We saw a mayor from the Oak Ridge community in Guilford County, North Carolina. We've seen landowners submitting their motions to intervene. We've seen messages of opposition to the project. So those are the things you can do in the now as you're waiting for whether or not you'll be accepted as an intervener. And then we'll also be looking to what comes next. That's FERC deciding to have an environmental impact statement or an environmental assessment. They will put that in the docket, and it will be time for us to respond, to read it. And just a warning, it will be very, very long. So you can look to groups like Southern Environmental Law Center, Appalachian Voices, 7 Directions of Service, the Sierra Club, among others, who are part of the coalition represented by the work on nossep.org to give resources, talking points, places to ask questions and discuss what you're seeing in the environmental impact statement or environmental assessment. And then you need to weigh in, react, see where there's problems with it, what's missing, and continue to voice your opposition. So we've seen the steps of using the FERC website, it's not the most user friendly just because there are multiple steps, but really happy to provide one-on-one help if you are getting stuck in that process and have questions. Again, to reiterate, December 3rd at 5 p.m. is the deadline for intervention. So you want to work towards getting it submitted in by then. So I'm going to pause here. I mean, we do have, an expert among us with Deirdre's understanding of these FERC processes. I know some in tonight's program have participated in these types of proceedings before. But with that, I am going to end the recording. So I want to thank you for listening to this part of the program. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording if I can figure that out. But I want to thank you all for your attention to this. And these resources are going to be available on YouTube and no SSEP